Welcome to our Fluency Best Practices and Fluency for Multilingual Learners, where we will wait another minute or so to see if anyone else joins us. While we're waiting, if you would like to throw into the chat any questions you have around reading fluency instruction and MLs, you can just put one of these numbers in if one of these questions corresponds to something that you're wondering, or please specify any other questions you might have. Jenna, I see you wrote one yes. Is that yes, you agree, or yes, you have a question?
Oh, sorry. Number one on your waterfall, I put, is it appropriate? I said yes.
Oh, just that it is appropriate. Okay.
Sorry. For newcomers and secondary MLs. I'm answering the rest now because I'm actually focused.
Okay. All right, if you're just joining us, if you want to throw in any questions to the chat around fluency for multilingual learners, and we will get started because it is a little late. So Kristina, do you want to go back to the beginning? And again, feel free to just put questions in as they come up. But my name is Kathryn Tepedino. I am the PD chair of NJTESOL-NJBE, and we are so lucky to have Kristina here with us. She is a reading specialist and literacy coach in the Metuchen School District. For over a decade, she has supported students with dyslexia and reading difficulties. She's SERI certified dyslexia specialist, and an Orton-Gillingham teacher. She is committed to expanding her expertise as she's earned a master's degree from TCNJ, along with her reading specialist certification. She's also trained in multiple linguistics phonics programs, including the program Reading Simplified. And Kristina enjoys her role as a literacy coach, where she supports educators with data analysis and high quality literacy instruction. She often provides PD for teachers and administrators on structured literacy, response to intervention, and data-driven instruction. And she is presented at NJPSA, FEA, NJA, SCD conferences, and she has published articles in Educational Viewpoints. So Kristina, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm excited that you guys invited me to come talk about fluency. I feel like last year we really worked on those lower strands of the reading rope. So this year we can kind of like move along in that process and talk about some of those upper level skills for our students.
Yes.
So tonight we're going to just talk about some general understanding about what reading fluency is. We'll also talk about assessment in reading fluency, and then we'll talk about like what good instruction in reading fluency looks like. And to get started, I know we reviewed this last time, but I think it's important to understand the essential components of reading instruction. So in 2000, the National Reading Panel came together with the objective of identifying the best methods for teaching children how to read. They considered over 100,000 studies to determine evidence-based reading strategies. And here you can see the 5 areas that they deemed as essential pillars of reading instruction. And today we're really going to hone in on that fluency piece, but we know that effective reading instruction really does encompass all 5 areas.
So I want you to take a minute to read this quote from my former professor at UVA and type into the chat what stands out for you. So instruction in fluency can be particularly beneficial for English language learners because activities designed to enhance fluency in reading can also contribute to oral language development in English. As students practice reading English text, they're gaining valuable information about the sounds and cadences of spoken English. And they're also developing vocabulary skills that can contribute to oral language fluency as well as reading and listening comprehension. So I'm seeing a lot of oral language fluency in the chat. It contributes also to oral language development. Yes, absolutely. So I just highlighted a few of the words that really stuck out for me. This reciprocal process that oral reading fluency has on oral language fluency and oral language development, as well as reading and listening comprehension.
All right, and that's going to be a theme or a connection that we'll talk about throughout the night. So first, we'll dive into some of the components of understanding reading fluency. So here's like a quick definition of reading fluency. It's the ability to read a text quickly, accurately, and with proper expression. So if we look at what it means to read quickly, speed, it really means like speed or automaticity, which is important because when students can decode words quickly, it frees up that cognitive load to be able to focus on making meaning. When we look at accuracy, that ensures that students are recognizing words correctly, which is it's really critical for building both vocabulary and comprehension. So for misreading or skipping words, that can really disrupt a student's understanding. And then last week, we'll talk about expression, which is sometimes called prosody. And this reflects the reader's ability to use appropriate phrasing, intonation, and emphasis when they're reading. And this demonstrates not only decoding skills, but also understanding of the structure and the meaning of the text. So together, these three elements create fluent reading, which is really that bridge between word recognition and comprehension. Okay. So we'll dive a little bit more into each of these three components. So research has long emphasized the importance of reading fluency. A lot of the leading researchers in this field describe accuracy as the essential step in building fluency. Fluency cannot develop unless our students are really reading words correctly. We can't expect them to read faster or with expression without developing that accuracy first. So I just grabbed an example of an authentic text that a student might encounter, and just consider like what some of these errors might be. If the word is grandmother and the child is reading grandma, or if they're reading a word like scruff versus skirt. So these may seem like visually similar at a glance, but when we're looking at accuracy, it really does require precise attention to every letter and sound pattern. So this is why in our instruction, we must really ensure that students are given explicit practice and support in decoding so that their fluency really rests on that strong foundation of accuracy. Okay, and then when we're talking about like what is accuracy, like what does that mean in terms of like numbers? We know that students need to read with at least 95 to 98% accuracy to read successfully on their own. And then when we look at emerging readers, so whether this is students who are just learning the code because it's their first experience in school, or maybe we have newcomers really learning at that early level, the target is even higher for them. So we look at about 97 to 98% accuracy is what's required, because at this stage of accuracy, it's really critical because it's laying that foundation for both fluency and comprehension. Okay. And then when we talk about appropriate rate, really reading fluency is often defined by a lot of people as reading that sounds natural, much like spoken language. So when a student reads at a rate similar to how they would speak, they're better able to process and understand the text. So it's important to note that fluency instruction really emphasizes improving reading rate but also while maintaining that accuracy. Because if we're just focusing on that speed component, then we might hear a lot of errors or, disfluent reading with their prosody that really won't support their comprehension. So also we know that reading too slowly can also hinder understanding as well. So I know a lot of teachers will be like, don't read like a robot, or they'll have like visuals like a little turtle, a little bunny, like the tortoise and the hare, just to help them focus on that like just right reading speed.
Also in her book, Elsa Cardenas-Hagen points out that a lot of our MLs are able to read with, a good rate, like at a good speed and with accuracy. But their comprehension may be lacking. So we want to make sure that they're comprehending what they're reading. And so we're always infusing meaning into our instruction, which we'll get into later.
Okay. So let's think about how fluency develops. So research shows that fluency is not an all-at-once skill, but it rather develops in a progression. So the first step in fluency is accuracy. Students need to be able to correctly identify their letters or their word patterns, their words, up all the way up through the text level. So again, accuracy really provides that foundation for automaticity. And then as students begin to become more accurate, then they're ready to gain that automaticity, and they move from reading like single letters into these letter patterns or whole words. I don't know. Okay. So this gradual progression really ensures that students are able to read words with both speed and comprehension. So it's really following that like systematic process. And then when we think about the purpose of fluency, I think it's important to note that fluency is not an end in itself. We don't teach it just to teach it. We really teach it as a means to support two critical outcomes, mainly to support that comprehension, but we also see boosts in student motivation as well. So we see that fluent readers are able to better focus on meaning rather than that just decoding and thinking about, oh, what does this sound make? So it's that bridge between both decoding and comprehension. So we want to connect our fluency instruction always back to comprehension, which is the purpose of reading, and that it's really just without fluency, students will expend a lot of that energy on their decoding and leaving that less capacity to understand and engage with the content. So another important understanding when thinking about literacy development is Scarborough's reading rope. So I know we looked at this last time, but the top strands include those language comprehension skills, and those bottom strands include word recognition strands. And as these sub-skills intertwine, we see the development of fluent reading. So while it's not a strand in itself, it's when all of these pieces come together, that's when we see the fluency. All those pieces are in place prior. Okay. So as we discuss fluency, with fluency, it's important to have a clear understanding of what typical oral reading rates look like at different grade levels and points in the school year. So one widely referenced set of benchmarks comes from this resource, Hasbrook and Tyndall's Oral Reading Fluency Norms, which really provides like grade level expectations based on extensive research. So in addition to this tool, I know some school districts use assessment tools like Dibbles or AimsWeb or EasyCBM, which may provide their own fluency norms. So if your school does already have an assessment tool in place with fluency norms, it's best to use those as a reference. However, if you don't, or I know some people do have an additional tool, I always reference back to this one and compare it as well. So it's a helpful guide. So we always want to try to aim for our students to read between the 50th and 75th percentile. That's like really the optimal level. And interestingly, evidence indicates that pushing students to exceed past that 75th percentile may actually be counterproductive for comprehension. So the goal is not really just to read as quickly as possible, but to read at a pace that supports their understanding of the text. So I know usually we like to get to that 100% level, but really hanging out at that 50th percentile is okay in this assessment. Like that means that they're reading just like at an average pace and would free up understanding for comprehension.
And just important to point out is that these are normed on monolingual speakers. So we should definitely use them as a guide for our MLs to see where they are against their grade level peer group. But it's normal for MLs, you know, they're learning a second language, so it's normal for them to read slower. And also important to note that the accuracy percentages, the reading rate ranges here, you know, they're based on the English language and don't apply to reading in other languages. So we've linked Spanish oral reading fluency benchmarks here. So, you know, if you're looking for Spanish norms, you can click those links and find them there. So I just want to point out that the New Jersey Department of Education's Lear office put out an ML checklist in the appendix of the new literacy framework that was released this year. So the checklist reminds us to use assessments such as these screeners, like a oral reading fluency screener, as a guide during ongoing progress monitoring. But also, you know, we should be using multiple measures such as true peer comparisons, where you compare MLs to other MLs with similar educational backgrounds, you know, cultures, languages, and also looking at educational history prior to, you know, coming to the United States. And, you know, MLs are not a homogeneous group of students, so really looking at individual student needs. Also, just quickly wanted to point out that in the ML checklist, there are other resources, not only for screening, but just reminding us of tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction best practices, such as, you know, if you have a bilingual program and students are learning to read in both languages, they are also ideally screened in both languages whenever possible. And that, you know, tier 1 instruction, you know, they're receiving those ESL services. And if they need those extra interventions, such as tier 3 reading intervention, that should be in addition to ESL and not in replacement of ESL. So please check out the checklist because it has a lot of great information. And here again is just some info on tier 1 core instruction strategies. So please check that out. All right, so we're going to move into expression now. This is another dimension of fluency that is very important. It includes several elements such as phrasing, pitch, volume, and the overall intonation of voice. When students read with appropriate expression, their reading should sound like ordinary speech, just talking, having a conversation. And it's important to note that expression is not just like a performance kind of a thing, that it also conveys meaning and it helps students really understand the text. Research indicates that expression is typically a reflection of comprehension rather than a mechanism to directly improve it. So in other words, students who have expression, they have it because they're understanding the text, but improving it alone does not necessarily enhance their understanding. So as teachers, our goal really needs to be to support expression, but as part of a broader goal of the real focus is on comprehension. But having students internalize phrasing, intonation patterns that align with meaning. And this is really difficult for our MLs. So we really need to teach this explicitly. So here we have examples of sentences that illustrate how emphasis on different words can really change the meaning of a sentence. And having these discussions with our MLs is going to be really important. So for instance, in the sentence, Robert borrowed my new bicycle, the emphasis here is on Robert, not Raymond. So if I say Robert borrowed my new bicycle, I'm emphasizing Robert and not someone else. So teaching this to our MLs is critical because they might not be making these inferences or realizing that we're emphasizing Robert and not someone else. And then just transferring the emphasis to borrowed. Robert borrowed my new bicycle, right? Maybe we should infer that Robert did not steal my bicycle. So when we think of a reader with good prosody, we imagine someone who's really using their voice intentionally to convey meaning, right? So it's more than just like reading in a nice tone. It's really reflecting, understanding, and comprehension of what they're reading. Research does show that fluent readers naturally know which words to emphasize based on different semantic and syntactic cues. Our ML students are not going to necessarily have that intuition, so we need to teach that to them. Also, prosody supports inferential comprehension, which involves understanding ideas that are implied. Again, this is very difficult for our students. Doing this in a second language does not come naturally or easy. So prosody is both a reflection of comprehension and it can also deepen comprehension. Am I breaking up? Can you hear me, Kristina?
No, you're good. I can hear you.
Okay. So again, inferring meaning from text and expressing it while reading is very hard to do in an L2. And as Elsa states here, it requires direct and explicit instruction. For example, in her book, Elsa explains that Spanish-speaking MLs, their tone may not rise at the end of questions like we do in English. So, things like that need to be explicitly, directly taught. She explains a reason for this may be because in certain Spanish questions, the tone rises more at the beginning of the question. So she explains words like como, right? Like the tone rises more at the beginning. So in English, this isn't the case. So they would need direct, explicit instruction in like how the English voice rises and falls. I remember when I moved to France and I was learning French, for the first time, I really realized, the different intonation patterns, and I would try to mimic them. But no one like really explicitly taught that to me. So it can be very helpful to teach that. And this will help have a positive impact also on their oral language, as well as their oral reading expression. All right, so to recap here, the important aspects of fluency, right, are the ability to read a text quickly, accurately, and with proper expression. By focusing on these three components, we can assess and support fluency in a way that really contributes to overall reading proficiency.
Okay. Now we're going to take a look at what it means to assess reading fluency. Okay, so to assess fluency, we kind of break down each component there. So when we're talking about speed of reading, we're talking about the rate. When we're talking about accurately, we're looking at accuracy and their percentage of words correct. And then when we're talking about with proper expression, we're talking about how their reading sounds in terms of phrasing, intonation, and things like that. So we're going to break down those areas. So we can use an oral reading fluency assessment to determine rate and accuracy of reading. So rate is measured as words per minute or words correct per minute, and accuracy is measured by the number of words read correctly. So some widely used or oral reading fluency tools include DIBELS, which does have free probes on their website. If your school doesn't use the official program, you do have the ability to download and use them, in addition to AimsWeb and FastBridge. So these assessments not only help identify students who are struggling with fluency, but can give us a little bit of an indication on how to guide our instruction and definitely monitor their progress. So in practice, when we calculate fluency, we look at words correct per minute and accuracy, and then we can use that to compare it back to the Hasbrook and Tyndall chart to compare it to their grade level peers. The nice thing is that it is a 1-minute assessment, so you can, use these probes. You can set a 1-minute timer and have the student read, and then you can make those calculations. And a helpful image is to think of the ORF task like a thermometer. So we can compare oral reading fluency to a thermometer. So just like a thermometer provides us with a quick read of a patient's temperature, the ORF gives us a rapid and reliable snapshot of the student's reading performance. So both of these are quick tools to use, and they allow us to frequently monitor progress without taking significant instructional time. So both of these results are numerical and are typically compared against an established benchmark. So think of these benchmarks like the normal temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and students' ORF scores are compared to that range, which can indicate, oh, I should be a little concerned, or, oh, they seem okay. And it's important to note that ORF is not a diagnostic tool. So just like a thermometer shows us, oh, this child has a fever, it doesn't tell us the cause of the illness. So an ORF score showing that a child has low oral reading fluency does not really tell us the underlying reason for the struggle. So it really just signals that there is an area of concern, and it would require a further investigation and some targeted instruction to improve. And then it is important to note that there is a really close link between oral reading fluency and comprehension. So comprehension is definitely a highly complex cognitive process that can be very difficult to measure reliably in a school setting. So while researchers have developed methods to assess comprehension, we know that they're extremely time consuming. They can take up to 3 hours. Oftentimes they require a CST evaluation. So because of this complexity, we often rely on indirect measures to gain an insight into a student's reading comprehension. So these can include reading words accurately and fluently. We can look at language ability, curriculum-based measures, and think aloud protocols, which can provide us some more qualitative insights into how students are processing text. So we have about 4 decades of research that tell us that ORF, when it's measured as words correct per minute, has a moderate to strong correlation with reading comprehension. So to clarify with that, the correlation between ORF and comprehension does not reach an exactly perfect level. The highest validity coefficient is about 0.99. So studies show that ORF scores generally correlate with comprehension at levels ranging anywhere from 0.7 to 0.9. So this means while ORF is a strong indicator of comprehension, it does not directly measure comprehension itself. So we can use ORF as a practical screening tool. High fluency scores would suggest a likelihood of adequate comprehension, whereas lower fluency scores can kind of indicate that students may be experiencing difficulties with understanding text. So ORF is a very quick, it's a 1-minute tool to use that we can use alongside of other assessment tools to get a complete picture of a student's reading ability. So using this measure, I see a lot more benefit and insight into a child's ability to comprehend much more effectively than something like a DRA or an FMP, which is not really research-based and takes so much longer to get a valid measure. And we can also use fluency rubrics. So these are really helpful when we're trying to assess expression. We have to use more like rubrics and checklists because these tools allow us to listen carefully to students read. And then we, as the listener, can systematically categorize aspects of their phrasing or their intonation or their overall expressiveness. So a true fluency assessment could be a combination of both their oral reading fluency and expression. And then we also want to tie that back to their comprehension as well. So we know that they're all deeply connected. And by combining some observational tools like rubrics with comprehension checks, we can get a more holistic view of students' reading fluency and better target our instruction to support both their decoding and their comprehension overall.
So these descriptors do apply to multilingual learners just as they would apply to monolingual students. So you can use like the same rubric, same descriptors. This rubric, I believe, was developed by Tim Rosinski. Also want to point out that the errors that you would typically see in non-fluent monolingual readers would include common errors that you will also see in multilingual learners with less developed English skills. Also want to point out that students rated on this rubric at a level like 1 to 2 would be considered non-fluent, and students rated at levels 3 to 4 would be considered on like fluent readers. And then here's just, you know, a more elementary level kind of a rubric, or, you know, one you can use with newcomers. It's, you know, simpler text, more simple to understand.
And I've also used like more student-friendly rubrics to allow students to self-assess their reading or like record it and listen back and self-assess in that way as well. So it's a good tool to use.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're going to shift gears into more instruction in reading fluency and what that could look like. So we know that fluency instruction should begin only after students really achieve a reasonable level of accuracy in their reading. We talked about this earlier, but accuracy is that foundation, and students need to recognize words correctly before we're asking them to focus on speed. So if we push our non-automatic readers to increase their speed or their rate, that can actually interfere with their comprehension and reinforce more errors rather than supporting that fluency development. So our approach is therefore very sequential. We'll ensure that they're reading accurately, and then we'll work on increasing that reading rate. Okay. And this is a question in intervention that I see a lot. So they'll say, okay, my students came out low on the oral reading fluency task. Do they need a fluency intervention? And of course, my answer, the short answer, maybe. So research suggests that fluency is not just a measure of speed like we talked about. We know that it incorporates that accuracy, the rate, the prosody. So we really have to consider our assessment data and think about the individual needs of the student rather than just like jumping right from that score to assuming that they need a fluency intervention. So when we look at an example of this, we see, so this was taken a little snippet from the Dibbles assessment. And before we talk about that, let's talk about the color bands. So if you see the child with a red score, red indicates that they're well below the benchmark for that grade level. They're at the highest level of risk. Yellow indicates that they're slightly below the benchmark for that grade level. There's some level of risk. Green indicates that they're on benchmark, kind of falling within the expectation of the grade level. And then blue would indicate that they're above benchmark in that area for the grade level. And then when we're looking at the test on the left says ORF-AC. So that stands for the accuracy. So the goal for this point of the year would be 92%. And then you can see why the color bands are falling the way they're falling. So if they're below, they would indicate yellow and so forth. And then on the right is the ORF test. So that's the words correct per minute. And the goal for this point in the year would be 49 words correct in a minute. So when we look at student 1, the student came out on benchmark for their accuracy, but well below in their words correct per minute. So in my mind, I would say, okay, they're probably reading very slowly. It's great that they're accurate, but in this case, it may be helpful to work on an intervention for fluency to help them increase their rate and ensure that they're obviously comprehending the text at that level. So it's definitely more helpful to be able to hear the child in action and hear what they're sounding like. But when we're looking at data alone, that's kind of the picture that it paints for me. And then student number 2, who scored both low in the words correct per minute and their accuracy, would likely benefit from targeted support in decoding instruction because they're weaker in that accuracy. They need to build up their accuracy first before working on that speed. And sometimes, depending on the student, you can work on that simultaneously, but because they were very close to that benchmark, you might work on both of them. And then student number 3, I actually have more questions than I do answers. So I'm wondering, like, are they skipping a lot of lines that really hindered their accuracy? Are they just word calling and not really monitoring their reading at all? Are they attending to punctuation correctly, or are they just speed reading? So I definitely have to do some more diagnostic assessments to get more information about like what would be best for that student. Kathy, do you have anything else to add for these kids?
No, I think you nailed it.
Okay.
All right, so let's take a look at some real data. This is a grade 2 bilingual student that I worked with last year. And I'm just going to walk you through using this onlit decision-making tree to help you kind of make sense of all this. This is screening data from the M-Class Bilingual DIBELS report. So you can see on the bottom is the Spanish, and the Spanish is all in green. And then at the top is the English. The English is all in red. So skilled reading involves the integration of many subskills, as you can see here on the screener. And so it can be challenging to navigate this. So this flow chart really does help make sense of the data, and we're just going to lead you through it so you can see how to use the chart on the right and how to make sense, use it to help you make sense of the data on the left. So for older students, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. For younger students learning to read, so like kindergarten and first grade, you would start at the bottom and work your way up to find the next skill to teach. So again, like I said, he's on benchmark in Spanish as evidenced by those green boxes that say benchmark. So his strongs, so I already know that is telling me so much information, right? That is telling me that this child has strong literacy skills in his L1. So I know that I can build on that to help him transfer over to English. Whatever he has in Spanish will positively transfer over to English, or I can help it to positively transfer. So let's start at the top. We're going to work our way down. So we're going to look at comprehension first. So I see on the left, basic comprehension. That was the maze assessment on DIBELS. He got a 0.5. So he's at risk. He is well below where he should be. He is weak. So then the decision tree is telling us, okay, look at comprehension. He's weak. So next we're going to look at his reading fluency. So his words correct per minute. That is also very low. He is weak in that. He's at 24. And so now we're going to look at his accuracy, which is also weak. So next we're going to go down and look at his decoding. So decoding on this test encompasses word reading, which are like those irregular words or other sight words, and then his nonsense word reading. And he is weak in all these areas. So the next step would be to look at phonemic awareness. How is he doing there? And there's no phonemic awareness in my screener for grade 2. So I did a secondary diagnostic and he was strong in phonemic awareness. So you can see the next step is to provide explicit systematic instruction in phonics, decoding, and spelling. So that is what I did with continuous progress monitoring until we come to the mid-year. Next slide. So here we're going to go through the same process, but you can already see on the left at the top in English, he has made great progress, right? So let's start back at the beginning. We're looking at comprehension. So he went up from a 0.5 to a 4, which is, you know, positive, right? So he's still weak though. So we're going to go down and look at his oral reading fluency, his words correct per minute. So, you know, he did have some growth there, but he is still well below. So we're going to look at his accuracy. Again, he made some improvements here, but he's still weak, could still use improvement here. So let's go and we'll see if the skills below that have improved, and they have. So those foundational skills now have improved greatly, right? For word level reading, he is no longer at risk. For his decoding, he's above now, right? So he really took quickly to this instruction. So now, to help build up those skills, I'm going to focus more on multisyllabic decoding and a lot more like grade level text reading to help him get to the next level and continue to improve his word level and sentence level and text level decoding. So yes, and then we come to the end of year data. And you can see slowly but surely now he's improving. So I couldn't grab his comprehension assessment, but it was still well below. So then we're going to go to the oral reading fluency, still in the red, like but improving. And then you can see now his accuracy is proficient. So now we are working more on the fluency now, right? Text level fluency. He's got the accuracy down pretty well. So now I can really help him work on all dimensions of fluency. And then I just wanted to show that he kept his progress over the summer. So proud of him. And so still need to work on that, you know, comprehension, but he is now reading at grade level. Of course, like still room to grow, but this is just an example of a student who had that strong foundation and really took off with the direct explicit instruction in English. So Kristina and I are next going to walk you through the instructional strategies that you can use for students who need support in fluency.
And I think Kathy just did like such a nice job painting the picture of like how it's not just one area that builds up to that fluency and reading comprehension. This is just like, again, a reminder. It's not like an isolated skill. It's all of those components coming together that build that skilled reading and really make that like end goal of fluent reading, which improves their comprehension. Okay. So when we're talking about fluency instruction, we really focus our instruction in these 3 areas. We're working on accuracy, automaticity, and accessing meaning. So some refer to them as the 3 A's, right? So when we're working at that sound level or with words, phrases, sentences, all the way up to the text level, teachers are really systematically targeting that accuracy first, focusing on accessing meaning, all while, automaticity, all while accessing or addressing meaning. And this fluency instruction is very multi-layered, and it involves building those skills from the small units so we can have accuracy with our sounds before we build accuracy with our words, and work our way all the way up. So we see that continuum of instruction.
So I went and I just added proficiency level bands just to help with kind of some guidance as like where students may be in their fluency development based on their oral language proficiency. But these are just guides. We know, again, our MLs are not a homogeneous group of students. So, you know, for example, you could have a student with beautiful oral language proficiency, but never got that solid, you know, foundational reading instruction. So you might have to build up a student's like word level reading fluency, even though they're at like a proficiency level 3 or 4. So, you know, this isn't like, don't use this as like the be all end all. Like, we have to look at individual student needs. But if you refer to the new WIDA language charts, you can see kind of a correlation as to what proficiency level is going to need what level of fluency work. So your newcomers, your beginners, they're most likely going to need to develop that automaticity in sound symbol correspondence, right? In English. They're most likely going to need to build up to the word level automaticity piece. Then, you know, as their oral language fluency develops, that they'll be ready for more complex fluency work. Now, I'm not saying don't expose newcomers to like sentences and text. That's not what I'm saying. We should always be, you know, exposing them to that. But this is fluency work we're talking about. Do I expect a newcomer to read text fluently in English? No. Like, we can practice it. We can do like sentence level work with them, of course, but typically, and you know, again, this is not the end all be all. So I'm just using this as a guide, but typically they're going to, in reading instruction, they're going to be building up to this. And we're not going to expect like fluency level, like a fluent reader of text when they're a newcomer. So we just wanted to add these as a guide for you. The new language charts are amazing, so definitely check those out. I also want to bring up a point that when we teach our MLs to read, we want to front load that with building in meaning, right? Building in front load with pictures, visuals, gestures. We don't want them word calling. So it's really important to give them those scaffolds. A lot of like CVC words, for example, you know, our monolingual speakers, they'll know the meaning of the word log, but an ML might not. So it's going to be really important to pre-teach vocabulary with pictures and then have them decode the word, because we don't want them using the picture to decode. We want them to use their knowledge of sound symbol correspondences to decode, not, you know, relying on pictures. And we also want them to know what the words mean. So we don't want word callers.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to just briefly talk about orthographic mapping. Anyone familiar with orthographic mapping? Just want to get a feel. Yeah, you could just throw it into the chat. Okay, great. We got a yes. Yes. Woohoo!
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So orthographic mapping is a process our students need to go to develop word level automaticity, right? So orthographic mapping occurs when students make a map, essentially, in their brain of a word, and that happens by linking together the spelling, the meaning, and the pronunciation of the word. So that's why it's so important for children to know what words mean so that they can make those links and make that map of the word. And then that will lead eventually to automatic word recognition. And this process occurs when students have practice decoding. So that's why that decoding practice is so essential. So if we're just like showing them a picture to decode a word, then their brain doesn't have to go through the process of making those links of like spelling, pronunciation, meaning, and like we want them to really focus on the spelling, the orthography. So they're making all those links. So it's, again, essential that they get that decoding practice and that you give them explicit automatic feedback when they're decoding, so that eventually their word level reading does become automatic. All right, and really quickly to show the power of orthographic mapping, I'm going to show you a row of words, and I want you to say the color of the font of each word. Actually, wait. If you can, get out your phone and time yourself. How fast can you say the color of the font?
Ready? Should we start?
Let's do it.
Here we go.
Time yourself. Say the color of the font. All right.
Pretty easy, right?
All right. So next, I want you, yep, Jenna said 2 seconds. Beautiful. Next, you're going to time yourself. I want you to next read the colors of the font in the second row.
Okay, are we ready? Here we go.
Okay, just curious, did it take you longer that second time?
Oh,
8
wow. seconds, 7.42. Love the precision there.
Great. So yes, I agree. It took me way longer the second time. And the reason for that is that it's difficult to name, the colors, is because our brains are actually reading the word faster than we can name the colors. So brain scans show that word recognition is faster than like processing a picture. So this is why this whole orthographic mapping process is so critical, and knowing the meaning of the word is a really important part of the puzzle for our students.
Okay.
To make those connections. Okay, and then Kristina, so Kristina's going to walk you through now some single word reading fluency strategies that will help our MLs. And again, remembering how important it is to front load the meaning of the vocabulary so they're not just word calling.
So this is an activity that you can do after teaching the concept explicitly and giving them that practice to build up their accuracy first. So we know word reading in isolation can really strengthen word recognition and support smoother and more automatic reading. So for a reader to achieve fluency, they must first have that sufficient word level accuracy and ease. So we wouldn't do this with a student who's struggling there. So in practice, this can be implemented using a word grid, which may include heart words or phonetic words, whatever the skill is that you've already previously taught. And single word reading activities are most effective in a small group setting where instruction can be really targeted and teachers can provide feedback. So this, and the repetition would really help reduce their cognitive load and allow the reader to focus on their comprehension rather than decoding each word individually. So the student has the copy of the grid, and we worked on repeated reading over 2 times over 3 consecutive sessions. And I'm there to offer support and guidance while the child's reading, and we time them. And not only is it a tool for me to see how much they're improving from session to session, but also for students to see how much they're improving and building their confidence. So the first time they read this, it took about 72 seconds. And then the second time that same day, 61 seconds. And then by the last session, came down to 29 seconds. So you can see they really improved their fluency. And after reading, they're able to like recognize those words more automatically. So we worked on this skill for a few sessions, and then we kind of moved on to, building knowledge of a new skill.
So this is the same idea, but now using multisyllabic words, which can be very difficult for students to understand and to read. They really do need direct instruction in how to break down multisyllabic words. So teaching compound words is actually a great way to kind of ease them into this. So like a word like landform, and then, we can use compound words as kind of like a prerequisite skill to kind of then move them into reading multisyllabic words, teaching them prefixes, suffixes, roots. A lot of the English language comes from Latin, so there's a lot of shared roots we have with languages like Spanish. A lot of these words are cognates. A lot of these words also come from the academic word list. So this is a very helpful way to help our students build that academic vocabulary, as well as their fluency in reading and understanding words that they will see in higher level academic text. This really is like an asset-informed approach to teaching multilingual learners how to decode fluently, because we're building on their L1 whenever possible. So you can explicitly teach them, in Spanish, Tion says sion, right? So in English, it says shin. You can talk about the accent shift, location, so migrate, migration, so this will help them to understand, how to pronounce the word, the change in part of speech, and of course the meaning. So again, a great way to build up to reading, more complex texts at the upper grades is to look at words that, have similar roots, have similar prefixes and affixes, and building in their L1 is very helpful as well. And then this strategy is actually in the new WIDA language charts. They call it a word formation strategy. So you can look at root words, suffixes, word families, and this will help them build, meaning and fluency at the word level. And here's just an example of one of the charts. This is a 4th grade for expression. And you can see like word formation strategies. They recommend starting that at proficiency level 1. So with our newcomers. And here's the chart for interpretive. It's very similar, but I just wanted to show you that, these charts are out there and they are great. So definitely refer to them. They just came out, I believe, in May.
Okay. So then when we think about our instruction at the phrase or sentence level, we really want to consider some of these areas for instruction. We want to instruct on punctuation, dialogue, and rhythm of voice. So we want to teach students to recognize and respond to punctuation marks to help them guide their phrasing and meaning. For example, we pause at a comma or stop a little bit longer at a period to ensure comprehension. And that also mirrors our natural speech patterns as well. When we're talking about dialogue, we want to give explicit instruction in reading dialogue. Students need to understand the use of quotation marks and how to adjust their tone and pacing when characters speak. And this would support both their fluency and comprehension. And then we also want to talk about rhythm of voice. So students should practice reading with a natural rhythm, reflecting the flow of spoken language. So this involves like varying intonation. You might stress important words and maintaining phrasing that really mirrors how we speak.
And like
here's
we,
some,
sorry.
go ahead, Kathy.
No. I was just going to say, like we said before, like this is something that's, difficult for ML. So this is great to, really point out to them, and it will also help their oral language development as well.
And we just included some samples. So even if you're working on a phonetic sentence, like reading, having them decode the words in the sentence, you can also, show how different ways we punctuate or italicize words, like all of that plays into how our reading fluency sounds. So we put some examples on the screen there, but it's kind of fun to talk about, and how when they start to make connections, oh, I see the question mark, I'm going to make my voice go up. Like they'll make connections to it right away. This is also like a lesson template from Tim Rosinski. So it incorporates phrase and sentence reading, and it's a very structured approach to building reading fluency, designed to be implemented over 2 days. So I'll go through the steps really quickly, but if it's something that you're interested in trying with your students, definitely click on the link, and you'll get more information from the article. So before starting instruction, you're going to select a short familiar passage about like between 100 and 400 words, depending on the students, and mark phrase boundaries with slashes. And we'll show you a picture of what that looks like in a second. But one slash would be for a short pause. So, where you pause naturally in speech or after a comma. And then you'll use the double slash at the more like ending punctuation, where you pause a little bit longer. So the teacher would model the fluent reading and discuss the meaning with the students. Then students would read chorally with the class, and really emphasizing expression. Students would practice again, like 1 to 2 times. They could practice, independently in a whisper voice with partners. It could be another choral reading, however the teacher sees fit. And then students would practice either in pairs or small groups and receive some positive feedback from peers. On day 2, the teacher would then present the same text without the slashes present. And teacher would model the fluent reading, discuss the meaning. You would do the choral reading as a class. Students would practice it again, and then students would have a chance to practice it with their peers. And the hope is that students are used to their fluent reading with the physical bounds, phrase bounds, and really helps them understand that phrases really do carry meaning, and it's important, to carry over. So on the left, we see an example that Kathy has used with a student with the phrase bounds in there. And then on the right is a copy of the fluency rubric that students can use to either self-assess, the teacher can assess, you could do some peer feedback using the rubric as well. Okay. This is another example of the word grid from earlier, but it kind of brings it up to that phrase level. And if anyone uses the decodable text from Silisense, they have all of these phrase, like a lot of teacher resources on their website that are free. So before reading, this book, The Arctic Hare, you might want to practice some phrase reading. So then when they go to read the text, they have an understanding of those phrase bounds that would stay together. Choral reading is another strategy to support fluency. And choral reading is where all the students are reading aloud together along with the teacher. The teacher is modeling fluent and expressive reading, providing a clear example of phrasing, intonation, and pacing. So this simultaneous reading really helps students internalize the rhythm structure of language, which is particularly beneficial for developing that reading fluency. It's a very effective method for improving both accuracy and expression in our younger readers. And it can be implemented as a whole group, as a small group, and it can be a very flexible strategy that you can adapt to different classroom contexts. It's engaging, all students are involved. Another type of, another strategy that can be implemented that is also research-based is close reading. So this strategy is designed to build both reading fluency and word recognition. And in this approach, all students are reading silently while the teacher's reading out loud. And at periodic intervals, the teacher will pause and the students will supply the missing word. So this technique is drawn from the work of Anita Archer and Charles Hughes. You could read more about it in their book, Explicit Instruction. And again, it's a very highly engaging method that promotes active participation. So it can be obviously very highly motivating. It can be fun for the students, but they would need a lot of practice, repeated practice to become comfortable with the routine, I found. And it's a good strategy to use, you know, in addition to choral reading in the whole group or small group setting. A strategy that I really love is partner reading. So this really helps develop reading fluency through repeated structured practice. In partnered reading, the teacher will carefully pair students together, and one student will serve as the reader while the other acts as a coach, providing support, guidance, or feedback, and then the students switch roles. One key benefit of this approach is the high volume of reading practice it allows. So everyone's reading, everyone's engaged. It's not like, you know, sometimes during small groups, teachers working directly with students, and there's so many students kind of off on their own. So not that it's a replacement for small group, but it is a strategy that involves all students reading. And we see direct links to reading fluency and comprehension. So I'll quickly walk you through what this procedure could look like. I think it's important to pair students very purposefully, and that can ensure that both partners are appropriately challenged. We don't really want to pair like the strongest reader with the weakest reader. We want to make sure that both partners are receiving something beneficial from the support, from this activity. For students who might need like a lot of extra help or significant help, the teacher can provide like a decodable text or a word list in place of a text for them to partner read. So what you're doing instead is you're using your oral reading fluency data, and you're ranking your students from highest to lowest reader. And then essentially you're cutting your list in half so that your highest reader is reading with your middle reader. So you'll see like the number 1 reader would be paired with the number 7 reader. So it kind of is more of like an even match. And then of course, you'll always go back and check your pairings to make sure there's not any behavioral concerns. And you can mix this up through the year. It's not like an exact science. And then the teacher is circulating the room and checking in with partners.
And as Kristina said, like, you can definitely mix this up. Research does show that, you know, a number of different pairings are beneficial for multilingual learners. So while it is important for them to have a strong model of fluent reading, it can also be helpful for them to feel, you know, like they're the teacher and take on, you know, the coaching role themselves. So, you know, you could also pair them with someone who might be weaker so that they can take on, you know, more of like the teacher role as well.
And then just to go through the procedure real quick, the partners will get their materials. A lot of teachers use like a folder with like on the left side, it could be like a coaching card. On the right side could be the text. And then partner one would read aloud to partner two. Partner two listens and helps with any errors. Then some teachers will have like a timer go off at the end of that, you know, couple minutes. Partner one would summarize what they read to partner two, and then they switch roles, and partner two reads aloud. Partner one is the coach, where they're listening and helping with errors. When the timer goes off, partner two summarizes what was read, and they clean up and go back to their seats. Some teachers do the repeated reading where partner two reads what partner one had already read. And a lot of times you'll have the stronger reader go first. So it's almost like a second read for the weaker reader. Or it could just be like the next page on the text. I've seen it done in different ways. Another way to coordinate repeated readings could be on Monday, the teacher like models reading something aloud. A lot of times I've seen teachers use like poetry, students follow along, and then using like Tuesday through Thursday to practice in a variety of ways. You could do the choral reading, some partner reading. And then on Friday, have volunteers to read the poem aloud and discuss the meaning.
So another strategy is the language focused repeated reading for multilingual learners. I got this from the Project Lee. So Elsa Cardenas Hagen and others are responsible for this. It was funded by the United States Department of Education, and basically it's very similar, but there's more of like a meaning focus, vocabulary focus. So you would pre-teach vocabulary to the students quickly, nothing, you know, too in-depth, but just like go over some of the vocabulary you think might be challenging for them. Then you have the children make a prediction of what they will read based on maybe some of the vocabulary you presented, based on a picture, based on the title of the text. Then you would have the students, you know, in a small group, they would cold read. So that's an unpracticed read. And you would tell them when to stop. So you would time it for a minute. And then you could tell them, like, you know, put a slash or circle the last word you read when I say stop. And then you would have students graph how many words they read in their cold read in blue on their graph. And then for the second read, you would have them read and highlight any words they don't know how to decode or they don't know the meaning of. So they would flag words on the second read. And then in the third read, you would echo read with them. So you would read like a sentence or a phrase, depending on your students, and then they would echo you. And as you go through the text, they could like raise their hand or like put, you know, a finger up or however they want to flag you that that was one of the words they didn't know either how to decode or pronounce. You could say, is it a meaning question? Is it a, you know, a reading question? And then you would quickly either help them decode it or give them the meaning of the word. And then you would have them read it again, and this time it would be the hot read. So you would time them again and have them chart their time in red above what they did for their cold read. Also important to point out, like the text you choose should be at their instructional level, not too difficult for them to decode. And then on the next slide, you'll see a little graph of, you know, what it could look like, how their, you know, their progress they made from going from their cold read to their hot read. And we put the Project Lee video here. So if you're interested, you can go through and watch the video. Another great practice is using readers' theater, so students can focus on prosody in a way that's fun, that's engaging. It's also really important that we choose texts that reflect our students, that are culturally and linguistically responsive. I put some 2 books here that I have used with my older students, Voces Sin Fronteras and Travesía. And then Emily Francis, she just put out some new books as well, so I linked her here. I'm really excited about Millie's journey. So any text that you think will be engaging to your student. And we want to make sure that they're conveying their meaning, like we're practicing really like that expression. So we want to try to have them really convey the meaning through their expression, as opposed to like using costumes and props, even though like that can all be fun and has its own place. But when we're teaching students to use prosody to convey meaning, readers' theater is a great activity for that. So it will help them to really focus on their prosody, as opposed to using a costume or something else to convey what they're trying to say. And then we also linked a bunch of resources for you to get text that you can use, and these are all free.
Okay, I think we're going to end with one more, a very similar process to some of the others that we've mentioned, but this comes from Read Naturally, and this is an intervention for fluency that brings together teacher modeling, opportunities for repeated reading, and opportunities for progress monitoring. So I linked, they do have some free resources for this portion of the intervention on their website. And they also have a placement manual that's free. So I linked it in case you were interested, but knowing what type of text to start them at, it is helpful and helps you set your goals for your students. So really it is a very similar process to some of the things that Kathy mentioned, where students would do a cold read, the teacher would kind of chart their progress. The student would then read with a model. And then they would have opportunities for 1 minute repeated readings. So our goal is to get them to their goal in that 1 minute. So once their word correct per minute goal is achieved with no more than 3 errors and good expression, and they're able to demonstrate comprehension, then that's when they can stop that repeated reading. So that could be anywhere from I think 4 to 10 times until they're meeting their fluency goal. And really, I do a lot of charting with students who have fluency goals, because it is so motivating when they see their progress, even if it's from the first read to the last read, seeing how much they can improve helps to build their confidence as well. Okay.
All right. So just to reflect, bringing us back to the beginning, the questions we asked. So number 1, is fluency work appropriate for our newcomers or for even secondary MLs? I know a lot of people ask, is fluency work even acceptable for, older monolingual students? So what would you say? Yes, thank you, Dana. Absolutely, it is appropriate and actually much needed. Even our monolingual secondary students, have difficulties reading those multisyllabic words. So this fluency work at the word level, sentence level, text level is critical for all ages. What role does L1 fluency play in developing L2 fluency? Well, we can see that if that L1 fluency is there, that's only going to help the L2 fluency, and vice versa. Direct instruction in the L2 is going to also support the L1. Number 3, how to differentiate fluency work for MLs at different English proficiency levels. So again, you want to look at, individual student needs. It's not like a one size fits all. You can't say, oh, well, my students, proficiency level 3, so they need to work on, sentences or text level fluency. No, like we have to look at what is the data saying? It's not as clear cut as just this is their proficiency level, so this is the fluency work that they need. We have those language charts as guides, but you have to look at each student as an individual and look at what they need to make progress. And then how do I assess and monitor ML reading fluency and progress? We also talked about the importance of, whenever possible, looking at the L1 data. But, if you don't have access to that, we led you through the process of assessing fluency and really using that to inform what your next steps are. So are there any questions? Oh, wait, sorry. Go ahead, Kristina.
Okay. So we just wanted to reiterate a few of the important things as we conclude. We know that we always want to connect fluency back to comprehension, both in assessment and instruction. Our goal is to work on accuracy first and then work on rate and prosody. We want to infuse meaning into all areas of instruction for all of our students, but especially our MLs. And then when possible, we want to gather our data in the students' L1, and this will help us to determine our goals and inform instruction in their L2. And then we did link some of our resources that we consulted when creating a lot of these slides and activities. So we wanted to share them with you in case you were interested in reading further.
So now, any questions?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for attending tonight. We put the links in the chat. And we also want to point out, so exciting, that Elsa Cardenas-Hagan, I think it's on the next slide, Kristina, she is going to be at the conference.
I don't see it here.
Oh, no. You know what? I think Kathy might have added it towards the end. Maybe if you refresh.
Okay.
It's okay. No worries. But Elsa Cardenas-Hagan will be at the conference this spring. So very, very exciting. So make sure you register for our spring conference. And thank you again for joining us. Any questions before we sign off?
I just wanted to say I absolutely loved your presentation. It was excellent. And I really appreciated that you emphasized connecting, decoding, and comprehension, because it feels like so often this debate turns into, oh, should we focus on meaning only or decoding only? And you need both to have fluent, competent readers. So I really appreciated how you emphasized that. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Yeah, that's key. Any other questions before we sign off? Does anyone need the link for this PD cert? All right.
Thank you.
Thank
you,
everyone. Yes, thank you, Kristina, so much.
Thank you.
People are looking for the link, Kathy.
Oh, they are? Okay. So it is in the chat. So the PD certificate is in there, and so is the PDF to the slides. And then this recording will be posted on YouTube as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night, and we'll see you at the next PLC.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Great job, guys.
Thank
Girl,
you. Thanks for coming.
of course. I actually have like a middle school ESL teacher
Thank
who
you.
replaces ELA, and I'm like already thinking how we can do some small group stuff with her because she needs some support.
That's awesome. Yes, such good resources for middle school.
Yeah. Do you know how long it's going to take before this recording goes up? Because I might even suggest that she watches it.
I think Kathy's pretty quick with it, so it should be like by probably next week, like early next week. So.
Cool. All right, I'll keep an eye out. Thanks again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Bye. All right, I'm going to stop recording.